The end of an extraordinary week. The living hostages are all back. The argument rages on the return of the remains of those hostages killed in captivity. And Donald Trump makes a tour of the Middle East. The questions are piling up. Will the ceasefire hold? And will phase 2 of this agreement ever happen? It's unholy. I'm Jonathan Friedland in London.
And I'm Yonit Levy in Tel Aviv. Unholy, two Jews on the news. Before anything else, we should say that you and I will be live in New York City on October 29th. That's right around the corner at the Stryker Center, Temple Emmanuel, and our guests were very, very happy about this. Jonathan, would you like to say, or I'll say?
It is a very big deal. We have a major guest in New York, the former senator of the great state of New York, former Secretary of State, former First Lady. Drum roll, please.
There's only one woman who answers to all those kids, ticks all the boxes on that. Secretary Hillary Clinton and Dr. Karen Yachi-Milot, who is the Dean of the School of International and Public Affairs at Columbia. They edited a book together called Inside the Situation Room. It's about leadership and about decisions. It is very timely, I would say, to talk to them about all these issues, and we're very, very excited that they will be joining us. Anyone else who would like to join us, we shall say that all information about tickets are in the show notes.
It is. If you are in New York or in the tri-state area, as I think they say, why not travel to the Stryker Center October 29th? It's Unholy Live. People who saw our show in London know we do put on a show, and it's going to be terrific. And to be in conversation with former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton alongside Karen Yachi-Milot, I think it's going to be a terrific conversation. We promised you a big lineup, and I think we have delivered. So October the 29th, put that in your diary if you are within any kind of distance of New York City at all. We have a lot coming up. We also have, we didn't mention, two very special guests on the podcast this week. We will be in conversation with, I think it's fair to say, friends of the podcast. They've been with us throughout this ordeal. They obviously have a very unique perspective on the whole question of loved ones held hostage and the pain of waiting for a homecoming that in some cases means the homecoming of a loved one who is dead rather than alive. And we're talking, of course, about Rachel and Jon Goldberg-Polin. We will be speaking to them for this week's episode.
We have a lot to talk about. This is always true, but we wanted, before anything else, to read you a lovely note that we got this week from James Bambury. It's a very kind note. He writes, "I was gifted unholy by an Israeli coworker who became a dear friend just after October 7th. I've been hooked ever since and just waiting for Thursday afternoon so I can hear what the dynamic duo have to say." Thank you, James. But what do they talk about when there is no war? What was it like before the world changed? So thank you for asking, James. Actually, Unholy is a pretty crazy endeavor that took off January 2021, and we had a pretty long run before October 7th. We talked about news from Jewish perspective, and we talked about the relationship between Israel and the Jewish world, and there was some theater and there was some literature, and we had a ball, right? I mean, we did disagree, but less, and we.
It's all true.
It was a good time. Jonathan didn't like the fact that I gave huge presents on Rosh Hashanah, and there was a lot to talk about. And that is one thing I would say, that I think we had fun before the world turned upside down. But also, coming from this region, I would say, don't worry, James. It doesn't look like we will be lacking in topics in the near future.
Yeah, I mean, people talk about the Middle East. Obviously, there was, oil. There was one period where everyone was saying water is going to be the great commodity that's in short supply. The one forecast you never hear is that the commodity or raw material in short supply in the Middle East is news. No, there is plenty of that, and I don't think there'll be any problem. But it's quite true. We always thought that the sort of halcyon days before October the 7th, 2023. On the podcast, we had plenty to talk about. And as you say, intense and very sort of emotional disagreements about Purim costumes, about whether you should give gifts, as you say, Pesach, Rosh Hashanah. So yeah, a
About
different
science
era.
fiction that Jonathan doesn't like and fantasy literature. I'm very magnanimous to keep showing up here every week, even though I know that is what is in his mind. So
Given those levels of disagreement, no, we managed to do plenty. Would that we could go back to those days. I mean, if we're talking about that stuff, we would definitely take it. Lots of news, as I was saying, this week, the commodity that never runs out. We did an emergency update, obviously, for the day itself when all the hostages came back. You were on air, from dawn till way past dusk, relentlessly as the hostages were coming home. There's been a few days now for this to settle down. As you and I speak, there is a building argument about the return of those hostages who came back dead. I think the total now is 6 of those as we record. Just give us a sense of what's happened these last few days, whether the mood in the country has kind of settled into something. Just tell us how you're seeing it.
I mean, look, all in all, it's been a good week, right? I mean, in the sense that ever since October 7th, we got used to waking up in the morning and knowing something during the day is going to punch you in the gut. Indeed, there have been military successes in Hezbollah and Iran and all that, but the open wound of the hostages and, of course, the continuing war in Gaza. And suddenly you see people smiling. And it seems unusual in a way. It's like, what are you doing with your face? Oh, that's what it is, kind of thing. And it's been so rare, that kind of feeling of happiness. And you've had those pure moments of joy this week, right? I mean, every hostage reuniting with their families. You've had the Cunha brothers coming back. David, married to Sharon, she and their 2 daughters were in captivity for a little bit over 50 days. They were reunited. His brother Ariel was reunited with his girlfriend Arbel. She indeed was also in captivity. And you saw this moment where the 2 boys from the kibbutz were hiding from their girlfriend and wife, and then kind of running out to them, like still being this moment of mischief among everything that they have gone through. Just those, pure moments of magic. You saw Aviatar David and Guy Gilboa Dalal, who've been best friends from kindergarten. They were kidnapped together, suddenly reunited. All those sort of beautiful moments, as I said, of like pure joy. Alon Ohel, musician, coming back, playing the piano even, asking for the first song, one of the most beautiful songs in the Hebrew language. I think also your favorite, Jonathan, Shir Lelo Shem, Song Without a Name by Yudit Ravitz. So again, these people coming back from hell, from darkness into the light, and sort of being reaccustomed and sort of immersing themselves in their lives and in this new reality that they are immersed into. I think that as we see these stories of joy, there are also these testimonies of what they went through, and it is really as horrendous as we imagined. The starving, the torment, the torture, how they were held. We know some of these stories from the hostages that already came back. When you say, okay, this has been 2 years of people suffering this kind of torment. And by the way, it's not only the physical torment, it's the psychological torment. Like they told them, people have given up on you, Israel does no longer exist. I mean, all that kind of thing. And the rare glimpses that they did see or heard the radio more often of what was going on, they said that what was happening in Hostage Square, the movement that was calling to bring them back, is something that brought them the greatest hope. One of them said, I caught a glimpse of someone I didn't know holding my picture at Hostage Square, and it made me, it gave me so much strength. So that is what we have been hearing during these couple of days since they returned.
Yeah, and those details. Obviously, these names and these individuals have become, household names in Israel. They're people, everyone feels they know them. Outside the country, it's not quite like that, obviously, and certainly not outside the Jewish communities of the diaspora who did.
But exactly. And Jewish communities very much knew who they were.
Jewish communities did, absolutely. And in synagogues, you had pictures of of these individuals. And in fact, I overheard a conversation between a rabbi and a congregant this week in which the congregant was saying, well, what do we do with these pictures? It feels wrong now to, put them in the recycling. What do we do with these pictures? And the rabbi saying, we're going to hold on to these pictures for now. We'll work out what to do. But this level of attachment. But outside that is what I had in mind, in just the general media and others. I think a lot of this was coming. These names were sort of new, really. And so, for example, the revelation that Avinatan Or was held alone for the 2 years that he was a captive of Hamas, only meeting the other hostages on Monday as they were being prepared for release. And as they were released, apparently starved, obviously terrorized, and had lost some 40% of his body weight. That's just one instance. There are, of course, other accounts of those people who superficially looked okay, but explaining that they were essentially force-fed so that they would look acceptable, and if they'd been released a month ago, they would have looked emaciated and starved. There are many of these stories coming out. I think people were very moved by the pictures of Omri Miran playing with his daughter after being released, who had sort of, it's wrong to say come of age, but transformed, a baby when he was taken hostage and now a toddler. And every parent can look at that, anybody actually can look at that and realize the loss of time and what that means and the effect this is all going to have on those children, on those babies for many years to come. So these stories, obviously this has been part of the national drama in Israel for 2 years, to an extent in the diaspora, but for the rest of the world, I think coming to this, to some extent, for these stories anyway, for the first time.
Yeah, there are moments that you can't really believe the resilience of the human spirit. Matan Angrist, 48 hours after he was released from captivity, and this was a soldier, he fought in Nahal Oz, so from what we gather, he was also tortured more than the rest. He asked to come to the funeral of his tank commander, Daniel Peretz, whose body was returned to Israel as one of those deceased hostages. So he returned from captivity. He came to his commander's funeral. Just think of that. You see them beginning to talk to the people who supported their return. You see their families, giving them chocolate, for example, Aviatar David eating chocolate for the first time after 2 years. These are remarkable moments. And as you mentioned, there is another lovely story is that Matan Angrist met the chief of staff of the IDF, which of course is a different one from the one he remembers, Herzi Halevi, when he was abducted. Now it's Eyal Zamir, and he says, I can't believe that someone from the Armored Corps became the chief of staff because he himself is also from there. So it was a lovely moment. I think it's a moment where, before we get into the more complicated emotional news of the week, I think that it's a moment where Israelis realize, and perhaps this can touch upon even people who weren't connected to the story around the world, that every person does make a difference. And that this kind of grassroots movement of Israelis coming to Hostage Square week in, week out, and to other centers around the country saying, we will not give up on our brothers and sisters that are held in captivity, no matter what anyone says. I think that kind of is that beautiful lesson of this week, that you can make a difference, that every man, that person who held up the sign of the hostage that didn't know him, gave him hope. And that is, something that I think we can all take from this week. Again, it is all complicated, and we will talk to Jon and Rachel about this because they know of these complexities very well. But you have still families of deceased hostages that need to be returned. Of course, you have families of soldiers who died on the day, on October 7th, and since 915 soldiers, and you have the 1,163 victims of this terrible massacre, and their families will never get their loved ones back, and they have to live with that black hole over their heads. So, that is what is happening here in this country. over the border. You see, first of all, Gazans happy that the war is over as well. But you do see these images of Hamas executing what they would call internal enemies. This is a terror organization. It's vicious, it's sadistic, and it still holds a lot of the power in the Gaza Strip, even though the war is over. So that is something that we have to look at, very, very carefully and see what to do with.
Yeah, I want to get onto the politics of that. Just in terms of what's happening, as it were, on the other side. Again, I don't expect this to have played a big part in, for Israelis, but international media have been reporting on those reunion scenes happening in Ramallah and elsewhere as prisoners, detainees held by Israel were reunited with families, and I don't think it's getting the same equivalent treatment in international media, but it's certainly there, including particularly a focus on the detainees who were not charged. We know that 250 were serving life sentences for some really heinous, murderous crimes, but there were several hundred, I think maybe even 1,000 is the estimate, of people held in Gaza who had been detained without charge, and therefore they are getting a different kind of coverage, and some of them looking in not great shape and complaining that they had been mistreated in captivity. So there's a tension on that. But equally, there is great attention in Gaza on these scenes of blatantly, brazenly, Hamas on camera reasserting itself in the most brutal way and taking out those, whether they're people from the sort of 2 or 3 what is it? Is it sort of gangs? Is it militias? It's hard to find precisely the right word, but there were these groups who were sort of anti-Hamas that were beginning to coalesce in the period where Hamas were quite literally underground and out of sight, and Hamas are settling scores. That is obviously chilling to see, appalling for the people of Gaza who, on the one hand, they are, relieved that the guns are silenced. On the other, the idea that Hamas, their tormentors for 20 years, are back in control, in violent control, in brutal control. You feel for them, and but also I wonder how Israelis feel, given that for 2 years the message from Netanyahu was our war aims are, yes, 1, the return of the hostages, but 2, the destruction of Hamas, the elimination of Hamas. Others might have talked about, reducing their military capability or limiting their role. But a lot of people in government in Israel talked about the destruction, whole, total destruction of Hamas. And people can now see with their own eyes that has not happened. And that must qualify, the celebrations that greeted Donald Trump in the Knesset this week were as if he had solved Middle East peace for the ages, including all the underlying issues, and the whole conflict, the Arab-Israeli conflict, was over. And within, hours of him going, you see that not only is that not true, but the Hamas itself is absolutely still on the scene. Now, some people say, don't overreact. They're not the organization they were. They don't have the capacity they had before. They are able, they are, less armed. They're more of a guerrilla organization. But people can see with their own eyes that they look as if they're back in charge. On those lines about the politics, the two things we've talked about so far meet, don't they, in the form of the mother of one of the hostages, at least, who has been speaking in a way very politically about the prime minister and the limitations of his achievement.
Yeah, I will talk about her, and this is Anat Angres, the mother of Matan, what she said in the hospital the day after he was released. But I just want to make a point to say, indeed, you said that. I'm just going to emphasize that some of the terrorists who were released from prison are really the worst murderers that this country has seen. Some of them committed really the terror attacks that before October 7th were written in the history of this country as the most murderous that we knew. And by the way, they were released simultaneously with Trump's speech in the Knesset. So Israelis noticed it less. This was done deliberately, of course. And also it is a day that was so happy for them that I think that was the focus of what happened. You mentioned Anat Angrist and what she said, and indeed many of the families of the hostages spoke a day or two after they were released. Most of them thanked Donald Trump and his team and Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff, and they thanked the Hostage Family Forum, and they thanked the Israeli public, and they thanked Nitzan Alon. They thanked a very long list of people, but most of them did not thank Netanyahu. This was very clear, and Anat Angrist said this deal was struck not because of our leadership, but in spite of it. That is quite a thing to say when you are an Israeli citizen. And we talked about the sort of support that Trump got here from the Bibi camp, obviously, but also from the anti-Bibi camp, because they saw him as the man who basically forced Netanyahu to go to this deal. And without him, this is what they thought, what they think to this moment, there would not have been a deal. You mentioned you asked what the Israeli public feels about this. First of all, the Israeli public has eyes, and it sees that indeed Hamas is still there. You can say, okay, they're not the army they were before, they're now a guerrilla, but they're still running, calling the shots. And I will quote my colleague, Yair Sherki, who said, on air, he said, look, we did a deal with the devil. Hamas is the devil, and we need to look at it very clearly and know what the limitations of this deal are. But we also need to know that at this point, the war should have ended because of the hostages, because of the reservists who have fought this war and the soldiers who have fought this war for 2 years, and because of the legitimacy in Israel's place in the world. This is what he said. He said, we're not under the illusion that we won't fight Hamas again. So this is where the Israeli public is. We're not blind. Generally, the Israeli public knows that this is not entirely over, and the question of demilitarization of Hamas, I think, is the crucial one at this point. I mean, the president saying Hamas is going to disarm, and if it doesn't do it, we'll do it violently. Okay, but there are no boots on the ground for Americans. There are not supposed to be boots on the ground for Israelis. Then who's going to do it violently, if I quote the president? So that is the crucial question. But I think at this point, there is still this sort of pouring out of emotion of saying, okay, now for a moment at least, we can rest and regroup and see what lies ahead.
I was speaking to some people involved in the some of the sort of behind the scenes diplomacy, and a few things that I just think are interesting. First of all, this idea, of course, it's natural for the Israeli public to want to let things settle and just and people to regroup and to savor the return of the hostages. At the political and military level, the decision makers, I'm not convinced there's that much time. The worry that the people I was speaking to were expressing is that this is a situation that has to have kind of momentum, and you had to build on what happened on Monday and move very quickly to the next stage. Otherwise, Hamas will solidify their grip in Gaza. There needed to be some momentum on the part of the agreement that said, from the Arab states, we want to see the back of Hamas. There's no role for them. They have to be gone. They have to have new leadership in there. This is why people wanted the plan, why it was always called the day after. That wasn't just a phrase. It meant literally the next day. Because if there's a vacuum of authority and governance day to day, if no one else is doing it, Hamas will do it. And if Hamas are back there, just running day-to-day services, if they're the people that Gazans turn to get things done, that puts them right back in the box seat again. And so the point of the day after was to prevent not even an hour or 24 hours in which Hamas get their grips back on Gaza. And so while Donald Trump was taking his victory lap and his lap of honor being garlanded like a visiting Roman emperor, what needed to be happen was actual work to not just celebrate, but get this plan working. And it hasn't. And just at this point you made about the demilitarization of Hamas and the disarmament of Hamas is a really interesting case in point. How did the diplomats behind the scenes get the Arab states on board for that and actually get Hamas to accept that language in the second plan? I'm told that the language of disarmament was, Hamas said, we're never going to disarm because we understand that word as surrender to the Israelis, surrendering our weapons. So this different word was used about decommissioning, a word taken from the British process in a word taken from the Northern Ireland process, in which the Irish Republican Army, the IRA, agreed to hand its weapons, to decommission them, take them out of use, to a neutral, independent body, so that they did not feel they were, as it were, surrendering to the British. It's a key difference. It's a very subtle difference. It's a diplomatic difference. Donald Trump obviously just walked right over that by saying, you've got to disarm and you've got to do it now. Otherwise, it's, we'll do it violently, which, as you say, is an empty threat because there are no boots on the ground there. That is just a small illustration of how the careful diplomacy that got that deal over the line is being sort of trampled on now, indelicately, by those who are just looking at the headline and celebrating it, rather than thinking, you've got to get some authority in there the day after, otherwise Gaza get back. And if you really want Gaza to give up, Hamas to give up their weapons, which we of course all do, there's a way of doing that that gets you to success. And there's a way of doing it that will just make Hamas dig in and hold on to their weapons longer. And the diplomats, the Arab states, all the Europeans, they were all across this. And I'm really worried that the people who are now in charge and on the ground are not doing that. They're thinking it's all done and dusted and over, and we can just celebrate like, Cyrus the Great, as we heard on Monday. And I think there's a huge gap between all the talk and the hoopla and the actual, tachlis, I'm tempted to use that word, the actual nitty-gritty reality. And that gap is widening every day that goes by.
I agree, and I think that you're right to be concerned. And of course, people who are living very close to the border have even more reason to be concerned, because that is the key question. And what Trump has been saying so far is, I held Israel back, but I'll let them go forward in Gaza if the deal isn't met. Okay, but still, what does that mean, as you say, tachlis, for the deal? I just want to mention one more thing. I want to quote, if I may, Dan Goldfuss, Major General Dan Goldfuss. He's the outgoing Northern Corps commander. He was a top general in the war in Gaza. And this is what he said about watching the hostages released. He said, "This is a complex moment for me, a moment when shame rises and surfaces, because it emphasizes the terrible day when we failed." He means the IDF, of course. "The day when we did not fulfill our mission to protect the residents of the Gaza envelope, and since then have not managed to bring them back." The word shame is so prominent in this text. And when you ask yourself, and maybe someone outside of Israel would say, why do the hostages return their families? Why do they not thank the prime minister? He's the one who signed the deal in the end. And I think that I'm not getting even into, the vilification of the hostages' families done by people in government. I'm not even getting into when the deal could have been made or not. I'm just saying, simple. The prime minister never said, "I'm ashamed. I take responsibility. I apologize, and I will set up a commission of inquiry." And I think that is something that a lot of the people would point to as why they are still very angry. I keep that in my mind. It really resonates what Major General Goldfuss said, because he is a serious commander, right? And the word that he used is, "I am ashamed" as a commander.
Yeah, no, I agree. That weighs very heavily. And as you say, we haven't heard that at the highest level of the government from the politicians. I think, what has just got a lot of attention internationally was that moment. We talked about it at the time, where Steve Witkoff, in addressing the rally, mentions Netanyahu's name, there are boos. He mentions Trump's name, there are cheers. I just want to stress again the sheer weirdness of even those people on the Likud benches cheering Trump. Why? What is it Trump had actually done? He had said no to Netanyahu. Netanyahu wanted to say that the Hamas response to the plan was a no. Trump said, "I'm taking it as a yes." He pushed him back, and he said in his speech to the Knesset, he made very clear that I said, "Bibi, you're going to be remembered for this far more than if you kept this going, kill, kill, kill." He told the Knesset, what I did in this thing was to push Netanyahu back, to put my foot down. And yet all of Netanyahu's sort of, followers are revering Trump for having essentially acted as a block on their own prime minister. It is a very strange thing politically, but I think the Israeli voters don't miss that, have not missed that. They understand that. That's why they're grateful to Trump, and that's why they are booing the name of Netanyahu. And a big part of it is everything that's happened these last 2 years, including, and we reported on it episode by episode as it happened, that sense that the hostage families were not treated with the respect or compassion that they deserved. I always remember that moment where the hostage families were with the Netanyahus and talked about the number, and they were told by the Netanyahu's wife, there's less than the number they thought, and therefore they were being told, in effect, that some of the hostages that they were waiting for had been killed, and that came as news to them. I mean, extraordinary moments. So a lot of those debts are building up as well, and are as yet sort of unpaid, and there is still that appetite for a commission of inquiry.
Yeah, we should say, and we talked about this at length on our bonus episode that we did on Monday, but when President Trump mentioned the fact, or turned to the president of Israel, Herzog, and said you should give Netanyahu a pardon. I think that, first of all, that speaks to, you asked, what is the connection? You know, how does the Israeli right support Trump after essentially what looks like he was forcing Netanyahu to go to this deal? We would say two things. First of all, there are these connections, what the right in the United States and what the pro Bibi camp think in Israel about the judiciary, that connects the two. And right now we see the Bibi camp being very emboldened by what Trump said. Indeed, Yariv Levin, the justice minister, says he'll back a bill that would let the defense minister cap the number of Netanyahu trial hearings during wartime. All of the ministers of the Likud saying you should, cancel the trial. So that has been going on with the influence of Donald Trump. And just to remind our listeners, those who haven't listened to the episode, that the Netanyahu camp is selling this as actually a victory, as a success, and the deal that Netanyahu always wanted. History might show little different versions, but the fact that Israel still remains present in the Gaza Strip after the hostages have been released is something that they would point out to be Hamas's decision to compromise. It is. Does that qualify for a total victory? That is, of course, a question that we can still ask.
Speaking of the hostage families and everything they went through these last 2 years, it's something we obviously wanted and do want to focus on this of all weeks. And to do that, it's very obvious who we would want to turn to. Two people whose story we have followed so closely on the podcast, and whose contributions and voices have become very, very special in Israel, but around the whole Jewish world.
Very few people in Israel and in the Jewish world don't know the names Rachel and Jon Goldberg-Polin, tireless advocates of hostage release, parents of Hersh Goldberg-Polin, and people who know how to explain reality to us better than most. Rachel, Jon, thank you so much for talking to us on Unholy this week.
Thank you for having us.
Can I ask quite simply what kind of week it has been for you?
The truth is that overwhelmingly, it's been a week of relief, and a week of this interesting mixture of joy and compassion and pain and happiness and yearning. And it's been a real week of how do you do multiple emotional states at one time. I talked about this on Saturday night at the gathering in Jerusalem, that ironically, during the week of Sukkot, on the Shabbat that falls in the week of Sukkot, we always read the book of Kohelet, the book of Ecclesiastes, which we say is attributed to King Solomon, King David's son, King Solomon. And it's interesting because Sukkot is the nickname in the Torah is Zman Simchatenu, the time of our happiness. And then we read this book whose theme is anything but happy. Very much the book of Ecclesiastes has the themes of the futility of life, the fragility of life, the fleeting nature of life. And there is something about that even our wisest King Solomon knew, that at your time of extreme happiness, in order to experience that, sometimes you need the foil of something that's not completely happy. There's like this bittersweet chocolate, right? That there are tones and flavors and notes that you pick up because there's bitterness within the sweet. And so we we're looking at the third chapter of Kohelet, of Ecclesiastes, that talks about, the famous songs and poems about there's a time to weep and there's a time to be happy. There's a time to sob and there's a time to dance. There's a time to plant and a time to harvest. And the unique situation that we're in right now is that the universe is asking us to do all of those things simultaneously. And as human beings, that is challenging. But I would argue it is doable. It is challenging, and it is walking on a tightrope. As I said to my friend Mati, it's walking on a tightrope during high winds, but it's doable. And so that, for Jon and me, certainly, we have been experiencing all of these divergent emotions at one time. And I think the nation, and actually all of the people of the Jewish people around the world, are experiencing that. People were writing to me. We received thousands of messages. People were writing to me and saying, I don't understand how I'm feeling because I'm happy, but I'm so sad. But I'm happy, but I'm so sad. I don't understand. And I said, no, exactly. That is what we are. We are happy and so sad, and happy and so sad. And welcome to being Jewish in this moment in history.
I'm going to add to that is we have proof that it's doable, meaning we Jewish people, anybody who's been to a Jewish wedding is familiar that at the height of happiness, a young couple gets married and we're happy and celebrating, and then we stop. And there's a moment where we break a glass and we remember specifically the fall of the temple 2,000 years ago, but really more broadly, it's moments of sadness, it's loss, it's prices that we Jewish people have historically paid, and we remember that even at the height of our happiness. We modern Israelis have the unique way of celebrating our Memorial Day and our Independence Day, where literally at the end of Memorial Day, we're sad, we're somber, and then, bam, there's a moment, and now we switch, and we're celebrating independence, and we celebrate, and we're happy. We Jews know how to balance the broadest emotions and oftentimes do it simultaneously. It's what we do, and it's what we're doing this week. I'm going to say one other thing, which is beyond all the emotional side of it, something that just keeps striking me is unholy listeners have heard Rachel talk about Keharif Ayin. In the blink of an eye, we should get these hostages home. But over the last 2 years, we've talked about small deals, partial deals, no deals. We're never going to get all the hostages back. All these things. And it's astonishing to me. 2 weeks ago, who could have predicted that we'd be sitting here today with all 20 live hostages home, starting rehabilitation, with a number of the no longer living hostages home? The speed at which it happened and the magnitude and the fact that right as it happened, global leaders were gathered in Sharm el-Sheikh to talk about the future. The speed of it all continues to give me whiplash and astonish me.
You've actually just mentioned them, and I wanted to ask you about the group of people for whom that combination of contradictory feelings of joy and sadness might just be sharpest, and that is the families of those whose hostages are no longer alive, that you referred to, who are waiting for their loved ones' remains to come back. And as we speak, I think it's 6 that have been returned, but that means some 22, I think, that have not. And just what they might be feeling as they're seeing their friends and their, as it were, comrades who they've been in this movement with together all this time, and they're celebrating, and obviously they're happy for them, but they're waiting for the remains of their own loved ones. And I ask that in part because I noticed that both of you have the taped number on your clothes. And when we first met you, Rachel, and first spoke to you, that number was in the 2 digits and the double digits. It's now obviously 741 is what's taped to you. I'm guessing that's somehow to do with the wait for the complete return, including of those bodies. But I wonder if you can just talk about what you think those 22 families might be feeling and living through right now.
So I can tell you what I think some of those families are going through because I've heard it from them. Last night, I attended the funeral of Daniel Peretz, who was killed on October 7th. His body was held. His story is now reasonably well known as the Peretz staff that included, among others, Matan Engerest, who was at the funeral last night and shockingly got up to speak. And it was super emotional, but there were a number of hostage families of all kinds, those like us who got our hostage back a long time ago, not alive, those who got theirs back just recently alive, and those who are still waiting. And I could tell you that towards the end of the funeral, one of the hostage families who is still waiting to get the remains of their loved one back came over to me and said, when will it be my turn to do this? Meaning to have a proper, respectful burial. It's agony, I know, for these families to sit and be the ones waiting and being told that maybe the remains of their loved one will not be found, and it's going to take some time. They all deserve this closure. One of the slogans of the hostage family community from the beginning has been Ad hachatuf acharon, until the final hostage comes home. And now that the living ones are home, this is kind of the test for the community. And I'd say that so far the hostage community is passing this test with flying colors, which is to say, within a day of people's loved ones coming home, those parents of hostages, those family members of Omri Miran and of Matan Engerest and of Nimrod Cohn have stood up and said, we're so happy to have our loved one home, but we're not going anywhere. We are still in this with the other families until we get all of the bodies back.
And that's why, a lot of people everyone has to do what they're comfortable doing in terms of advocacy. We've said this from day one, but that's why for us, because we are part of this hostage family cohort still, and these families, of course, who are in agony, are saying, don't leave us now, and they're not getting the happy ending, right? We had this gorgeous, emotional, historic, biblical happy ending for these live hostages who came home on Monday. And these other families are waiting for are we going to call it the privilege of getting their child back or their loved one back in a bag so they can put them in the ground. I mean, I feel that I could not leave them in this moment. And you know why, Elle? Because I actually am a mother who got my child back in a bag. And I know how important it was to be able to put him into the ground and that we have a place to go. And it is horrible and it is dark and it is painful and we will always suffer. But we have that. And it is an upside down world when you say, I want these other families to have the privilege that I had. And so we have to stay with them. We have to stay with them. And I'm not projecting that onto anyone else. I think everyone has to do what they're comfortable with. And so for now, this is what the families are asking, and I will do what they are asking.
Is it at all possible? I mean, I'm even curious to know if you watch some of the returns. Is it possible to also be happy? Was it something that was jarring, the fact that people were, uncorking champagne bottles? Is that an acceptable way of being happy? I mean, obviously Israelis, have been through 2 years of a difficult time. Is it okay to be happy when these are the circumstances?
I think it's definitely okay to be happy. I think it's actually very appropriate. I think that there's also compassionate happiness and delicate, kind, benevolent elation. And I think that the majority of people are doing it in that way to be careful. We have seen, I, of course, had many, many, many innumerable people reach out to me who were feeling broken by things they were witnessing. I did not see those things. So I didn't have that experience. In fact, maybe even the opposite. So many people were writing to tell me, it's so not fair, and how is it, that it's not also your family and the family of, all these other. Remember, there were 44 hostages taken alive who survived crazy, horrific conditions, who were killed in captivity. So people were saying, well, it's not fair. Why aren't these other 44 people coming back who were alive? And people being very empathetic. But I do think for sure there shouldn't be just one reaction or another. And I also, John and I had the opportunity last week. We went to Sheba Hospital. There were some families that had reached out through other people to ask if we could come just visit them. And, we've been so saturated in the struggle for the hostages that we haven't had an opportunity to really go to these families and these young people who literally gave every single molecule of their being to try to save these hostages. And it was very sobering for us to see these families who, for the rest of their children's lives, we have this huge spectrum. There are people for whom, psychologically, they will always carry the scars and the wounds from this period, as will many civilians, obviously. But it then spanned the gamut to the most severe injuries you can even begin to imagine. And these are their children who are 20-year-old, 21, 22-year-old children who forever will not be able to do things that you and I and we all take for granted forever. And the children themselves, these soldiers and their families, have paid an enormous price. And that also is something that, we need to make room for that. We have to be super creative and divine and really motivated in a way that makes us rise above and do extraordinary things with this next chapter.
I want to something you said to us early on, Rachel, which stayed with a lot of people, I think, was this idea that Israel, even perhaps broader than Israel, will be judged by how it does this and whether it brings the hostages home. And I'm keen to hear from you whether you feel Israel has passed that test or whether the jury is still out on that test. And obviously part of it is about bringing every last one home, including those who are dead. But what I also mean by that is the fact it took so long, the fact that for a long time, from what we read and understand, there were opportunities that were not taken. The fact that in the end it required the pressure of a leader from outside to make this happen, as if Israel's own leaders weren't going to do it. I just wonder whether you think this is a test that we can say, well, good, we passed it. We're going to be judged by how we did this, fine, or whether yours is a more complicated judgment.
Well, I think right now it is complicated because we don't know, and I don't know that we need to know, but we don't know all the details. And, the murmurings that we hear of why decision makers decide to do certain things at certain times for certain interests and certain equities and certain currencies, we're not privy to that necessarily. What has warmed my limping soul is that I think the people of Israel and the Jewish nation around the world had the backs of these hostage families and really integrated into themselves in a profound way. This child is my child. This man is my partner. This grandfather is my grandfather. This daughter is my daughter. And I prefer to, when I'm trying to get a composite of who cared and who took it to heart and who did the work, I'm looking at the Klal Yisrael, the people around the world. Actually, just yesterday, someone wrote to me who was one of the creators of the Run for Their Lives movement, which was something that people took on in every country in the world. There were small groups of people, not necessarily Jewish people, who were gathering on Sundays, and they called it Run for Their Lives. They initially had thought, oh, we'll all go running together. But then it became very clear that not everybody is a runner, but people wanted to come together. these were happening all over the world with hundreds of thousands of people for the last almost 2 years. And one of the founders reached out to me yesterday and said, wow, um, it just feels like we really got something done. And I said, make no mistake. And I wrote back to her and I said, this happened because of people like you. And we know that. And, when we were out on the streets, each of us with our little homemade signs saying, bring them home, or President Trump help us, or all the clever signs that we've seen over the last 2 years. And people would say, you really think that's going to make a difference? You really think wearing the tape's going to make a difference? You really think that, sitting out there at this summit, at this juncture, is going to make a difference? And the resounding answer is it absolutely makes a difference. You know why I know? Because President Trump told us. That's how we know. He told us, you little people, you know what you all are? And I said, we're a bunch of nobodies. But you know what happens when a bunch of nobodies get together? We are the people. And the people's voice was heard by the highest, most powerful decision maker on the planet. And so kol hakavod, like all the honor goes to the people.
There's been talk about a Vadat Chakira Mamlachtit, a National Commission of Inquiry. It feels so abundantly obvious, and it seems, according to polling, that 85% of Israelis also think this, that we must do a National Commission of Inquiry. Again, it's not about blame. It's not about anybody paying a price. It's about being responsible, learning what happened, learning what led to the failure, and it was a total systemic failure leading up to and on October 7th, and how do we ensure that it never happen again? The second thing is you're alluding to the narrative, and the battle over the narrative has already been happening. It's going to be accelerated now that we're in a new reality. We've seen it for a long time, right? We've heard political leaders claiming over time, we brought back 180 hostages, 207, and now it's about to hopefully be 251. And there's truth to that, but there's also truth when the families of the 44 that Rachel mentioned who went in alive came out dead, and we believe, and I actually know there were opportunities to save them that were squandered, that's got to be part of the narrative. So that's going to continue. But really, when you speak about the story of this October 7th and its aftermath, it sounds cliche-ish, but I think it's still too early to know. It's what do we all do with this opportunity? I heard Tal Becker, ambassador and analyst, talking about President Trump, and he said something like, historically, there are people who have the capacity to generate the belief in the possibility of change. And that's rare. And we're seeing that now. For decades, we've lived in a region where our response, even as we've been strong, even as our economy has been good and high tech has been booming and tourism has been booming, is we have not capitalized on opportunities to change the trajectory of this region. And if it's being forced upon us now, that's okay. How will we respond to that? And will we, in the coming 6 months, 1 year, 5 years, 10 years, do something so that maybe, just maybe, our children and their children don't need to live in this cycle of every 1 or 2 or 3 years, battles, violence, another war. There's an opportunity here. It's right in front of us. It's happening in Sharm el-Sheikh. It's happening in this region. What will we do with it? And who will lead the people of Israel towards a different future? Those stories are waiting to unfold.
I mean, I want to pick up on that, John, because you both are very, very delicate in your criticism, we should say. I mean, there was a point where you tweeted something like you would ask the prime minister not to count Hersh in the number of hostages that returned. Again, very delicately said. I think, Rachel, also you said on our podcast, out of 68 members of this coalition, one reached out after Hersh died, 2 wrote letters. I mean, all of these acts of the ruling coalition, has it in any way, I wonder, improved? Have any of them reached out to you? And how do you see the future in that regard, just in the sense of the narrative of this country from a, political point of view?
My issue and challenge in all of this is that I really don't see the world through that lens. So I don't consider myself in any way whatsoever a geopolitical expert or even well-versed enough or well-read enough to speak with any sort of authority. Now, on the other hand, that makes me a normal person, which is 90% of us. But I'm always very careful because to me, that's not my arena. And it's not a place that really, especially having been privy these last 2 years, unfortunately, to so many back rooms and to seeing so much of how politics actually unfolds, it is not at all appealing to me. But I look more at the human side of it, which is, starting when our children are little, we say to them, sometimes you make a mistake, or sometimes you fail a test, or sometimes, you miss the mark. That is actually part of being a human being. You just say, I'm sorry, or explain why you thought you were doing X, but instead Y happened. And I think that when we squander those opportunities, even as politicians, and again, I'm not a politician, I think that would be very refreshing and very soothing to a nation that, even though, however we want to spin this narrative of, I never think they're absolutes, like this idea of like, we have won. Like, I don't know what that means, because that feels very dismissive of all the families that certainly have absorbed tremendous blows and losses. I think being more human, maybe I'm being naive, but I think being more honest and human could possibly lead us to transcend to a place that's even more impressive with more opportunities coming our way. But that's why I looked at Jon, because you say the word politics and I'm like, dude, that's you.
One of the things that sounds obvious, but it's become so clear to me in the last 2 years, is the power of words. And specifically what I mean is, we have had the leaders of the defense establishment, the military, the intelligence, come and sit at a table with us and look us in the eyes and say to us, I failed, I accept responsibility, I'm sorry. And that doesn't bring Hersh back. It doesn't change the loss that the country experienced on October 7th, but it means something. And I'm not going to go deep into politics, but you're baiting us, and so I'll kind of wade in. That kind of talk is so strikingly absent from political leaders today. I've actually recently been reading a lot about Abraham Lincoln during the Civil War, and kind of the arc of how he speaks to the people of the United States from 1861, and then in the middle of the war and at the end of the war. And granted, he had a unique way of speaking, kind of like Rachel has. But even in the midst of civil war, he was speaking in tones that held both sides accountable and responsible, reminding people that we will all be judged by our actions. We can't run from that. There's a way of leadership speaking responsibly, even in terrible times, let alone when it comes to creating a sense of hope for the future. And of all of the men, and they're all men, vying to be leaders of this country, I would say I like some more than others, but like I think so many of us, I'm really excited, and maybe it won't be this next election, maybe it'll be the one after. I'm really excited to see the 35-year-olds who fought and paid heavy prices these last 2 years, who I know they're out there. I know that there are those who are saying, I would otherwise go into tech or into something else, but if I don't go in to try to lead this country, who will? And we're going to see exciting people emerge on all sides, and I think that's great. I'm excited to see who those people are and to give them that rope to lead us.
Yeah. And you just compared Rachel to Abe Lincoln. I think that means a lot. We've just clocked
not
that.
in height, and not in beard.
I was about to say, Yeah.
Or oratory skills.
Flattering, you're flattering Abraham Lincoln there, I think. I wanted
Get away with
to,
it, ladies.
I wanted to just say something about what caught the world's imagination with you, Rachel, which is, and I've mentioned this before when we've spoken, which was you wrote a poem. You talked about seeing something of yourself in the mothers, the women of Gaza, and you said it at a time when it was very hard for people to hear that. I'm just wondering if, and that was quite early on, whether, given everything that's happened in the 2 years since, you have found that the room in your heart for the suffering of the other, as it were, has been squeezed. Has it got less? Because that would be so human if it had, given everything your family have been through and everyone else has been through. And if the answer to that is no, it hasn't got squeezed, I'm just wondering what you feel when you see what we're seeing now, these pictures that are coming back of a place really devastated, destroyed. Just whether there's still room, even in the heart of someone like you, who's been through so much, who's paid such a high price, for what you see on the, as it were, the other side.
Well, I was just this morning at a school here in Jerusalem speaking to young students who one of the students read the poem that I had made and read at the UN on day 67, which is, and I am in the poem, I am talking to a mother in Gaza and talking about, can we take all of our tears that are all the same and can we plant a seed of hope, even in this desert of despair? And the student who read the poem said, do you think that the end of the poem, I say, one day we'll sit together and our sons will be grandparents. One of them will have one arm, but who needs two arms anyway? And the young woman who read the poem today said, do you think that any of that is still possible and that woman still exists? And I said, I do think she still exists. And I also think her son is dead. I think both of us lost our sons. And that there still is no competition of suffering or pain. I think loss is loss, and it fills however much room we have. And I just last night was looking at some pictures of the devastation in Gaza, and it is really hard to digest. And I remember having that conversation. We had that conversation, I think, with Or Levy when he was released about at one point he and the others who he was being kept with were brought above ground to go switch to another tunnel. And he said, we got up and we looked at each other and we thought, what planet is this? It was unrecognizable as the place that these young men had been born and walked on and breathed on. So I actually feel blessed that even through everything that we have gone through personally and as a nation, as a people, that I think, thank God, that my moral compass is still calibrated, because I still see those other sides, and I do see those women and mothers speaking and crying, and I think, she looks like me. We're the same. And maybe I'm kidding myself, but that is what my response is when I see those pictures.
I guess I want to ask you, when you're saying this, and it's a very poignant thing to say about, that Palestinian mother, what would happen to her son. And I wonder, just when we met for the first time in October of 24, you said to me, I remember this, we don't know what the rest of our lives would be like. And I wonder, I guess, if I'm asking, and pick this up wherever you want, like, are you more focused on what that might look like, and more generally, like, where do we as a nation go from here? What does the future look like for us?
I think Jon actually thinks about this much more than I do, because I have felt so much this weight of this truck, which we've discussed, of this amorphous traumatic truck that hit us from behind. We were walking along our merry way October 6th and before in our very normal beige parv life, that was that was a blessed, easy life in terms of the day to day. And then everything, changed, by getting hit by this massive truck, which remained on us and is still at this point, obviously it was right on our chest until Hersh was killed. And then it moved down and was pinning us down from the waist down. On Monday, when these young, beautiful people walked back into Israel, it's my foot. I'm still trapped under it. We have, it's actually 19 people who are still waiting, 19 families waiting for their cherished ones to come home. And so it's very difficult because when you are underneath a massive weight, you're not thinking, what am I doing on next Thursday? You're thinking, holy cow, how can I, stay alive until this afternoon? But John's actually, I think, been able to bear the weight and the pain and be thinking, what do we do next? Meaning not we, John and Rachel, but what do we as a people do next?
I wish I knew what we as people do next. But what I'll say is, if I think over the last number of decades in this country, and I make generalizations, the right has pushed for territorial expansion. The left has pushed for some sort of solution with our neighbors. Let's generally call that a two-state solution. And the side that has won out, the dominant part of this country, has basically been, let's not choose either path. Let's almost ignore the problem, right? Over the last number of years, shrinking the problem has been common lexicon. By the problem, I'm talking about the fact of, let's call it 7 million Arab and Palestinians living across East Jerusalem, Israel, the West Bank, Gaza. And to Jonathan's earlier question, in my mind, it almost doesn't matter. I'm going to say this carefully. It almost doesn't matter. Are there innocents on the quote-unquote other side? Are there mothers on the quote-unquote other side who think like Rachel and Israeli mothers? My point is, I care about the quote-unquote other side, but even if we just look selfishly at the Israelis and what's best for us, I just know that what's best for us is to come up with a solution of some sort. Build. It might take 5 years, 10 years, 50 years, but let's start to build towards a solution that acknowledges the demographic reality between the river and the sea so that we can all hope for a better future. I feel like we've been living in decades of no to this idea, no to that idea, no to talking about this, no to talking about that. And we now got a wake-up call that tells us that's not productive. It's not good for ourselves to just ignore the reality on the ground here. And so I know I'm a little bit sounding like I'm in La La Land when I say, let's solve this big problem that's existed for decades. I'm not even saying let's solve it. I'm saying let's start to solve it. Let's lean in and acknowledge it and talk about it and start to come up with some ideas for how we're going to solve it. There's global interest. There's regional interest. Along our journey in the last 2 years, we met with Arab leaders who said to us, you know what your problem is? By your, they mean Israel. You're so strong. The whole region knows you're so strong, but you always feel the need to show how strong you are. Now, we could argue that comment, but the point is we are strong. We need to be strong. We must never let our guard down because we live in a volatile region. Check, check, check. Accept all that. Now, how do we harness our strength to change the unfortunate 77-year reality that has weighed us down? Let's start.
Well, let's start is perhaps the moment where we conclude this conversation. But you've given us a thought for the future there. It has been, as it always is, hugely valuable and a privilege to speak to you both, Jon and Rachel Goldberg-Polin. Thank you for talking to Unholy.
Thank you for
Thank you for
having
having
us.
us.
And may we have more wonderful news in the coming days. This wonderful bittersweet news, meaning sort of let's try to figure out how do we hold and embrace these families for whom this is going to be an extremely challenging chapter, getting home their loved ones not alive, and how do we also feel elated and support these people who came back who are going to need a lot of recovery. But as a people, we know that we have the ability to do it, and let's shine.
I want to add one more parting comment in the conversation, and Rachel touched on it, but I feel I must also add to it, which is we talked about narrative, and there's clearly already talk about who plays what role in having brought this deal. Trump, the government of Israel, Turkey's involvement, etc. The one thing that Rachel touched on, but I want to hammer it home, is the people brought this deal. And I just once again want to express hakarat hatov, gratitude to the people of Israel who ceaselessly went out and stood on street corners and showed up in squares and stood on bridges, and they made signs, and they went home at the end of all that every day and said, is this doing anything? Is this having any impact? And it's so easy to understand that feeling, but everybody out there who did that, know that the answer is yes, it had impact. You brought this deal. The people of Israel, global Jewry, everywhere we traveled, rose up and supported us, and not just Israel and global Jewry, but we've talked in the past, and I'll say again, how much support we felt from so many millions of people around the world. And when I say we, I know I speak on behalf of all of the hostage families, getting blessings from non-Jewish people in South America and all over the world, the people of the world who wanted to see this end, wanted to see hostages come home, wanted to see suffering end for innocent people in this region. You, more than anybody else, brought this deal, and we thank you.
And thank you very much for saying it. And thank you again for talking to us.
Thank you for having us.
Well, there is a reason why we have time and time again gone back to this extraordinary couple, these two extraordinary people. And I know we know from the reaction we get that listeners feel that they have built a relationship with them and they feel they know these two people, but they do get extraordinary sort of insight into what is something which most human beings cannot imagine, which those hostage families are going through this week.
I remember the first time I spoke to Rachel and Jon in an interview. This was a short time after Hersh was found. And I remember just thinking to myself, I don't need to say anything because they are the most remarkable people. And everything they say is something you really want to cherish. I don't think I've ever spoken less in an interview than I did ever, because it was just, please just say everything that you want, kind of. So that is the feeling with those two. I think there are many in Israel who would hope that they take some sort of, leadership role in any sort of way that they would want. But of course, that is completely up to them. We haven't had normal episodes in a while, we should say. All of them have been special updates for, it feels like, a few weeks. So we have piled up some mensch and chutzpah awards, but we will try to be brief. You want to start with kicking us off with the chutzpah nominee?
Why don't I? There's quite a crowded field and a bit of a build-up. There's a backlog. This is like when planes are circling over the airport. But there were many, and some of them, I'm afraid, are going to be lost to history. But one I do want to mention because it's of local interest here to me. In the immediate aftermath of the murderous attack on Jews coming out of Heaton Park Synagogue in Manchester in England, when the Jewish community here was really reeling from shock, Amichai Chikli, who is supposedly the Diaspora Affairs Minister, he's meant by his job to care about diaspora Jews, decided that the right response was to invite Tommy Robinson, that's the pseudonym of a far-right activist who has been multiply convicted of crimes here and is really seen as beyond the pale, even by quite far-right politicians who people know about, Nigel Farage and Reform. They won't have anything to do with Tommy Robinson. He is widely regarded as a racist agitator. the Amichai Chikli decided to invite Tommy Robinson to Israel, as if this is the one person who understands the plight of Jews in Britain. Jews in Britain put their heads in their hands because they despair at this move. Even the official bodies, which are often quite reluctant to criticize, very reluctant to criticize Israeli governments, the Jewish Leadership Council, the Board of Deputies, they put out a statement absolutely denouncing this man, denouncing this move and referring to Robinson as a thug. It just means that it associates Israel and, by implication, the Jewish community here with somebody who most people in Britain absolutely shun. And it was just not helpful at all. It was an act of tremendous chutzpah to do this, completely ignoring the wishes and the sentiments of the British Jewish community, who at that moment really were, they were reeling. And it would have been very nice to have had an ally in the Israeli Diaspora Affairs Minister. In the end, they got what felt like a kick in the teeth. So I wanted to mention that. The other story...
I'm just going to say, so he united all of the British Jews. That's a... Good. I'm sorry. That's a joke. Never mind.
No, it's a very good joke. It's a very good joke, and maybe we should make him give him a Mensch award.
He managed to do something so silly that it united all of the British Jews around.
Yes,
okay.
silly is putting it very mildly. But you're absolutely right. Maybe he becomes a Mensch for bringing a rare outburst of Jewish unity. Meanwhile, I think just as a more topical one, we can do as a chutzpah award collectively to the hundreds of young Republican activists who were collectively on a WhatsApp group exposed by Politico, in which they were trading just, off the scale racism and anti-Semitism, messages about loving Hitler, tons of just explicitly the N-word is in there about black people, it is there about Jews. Just vicious, horrible racism, a real sewer, and the lid was lifted on that by this revelation by Politico. People can go and look at the details and some of these messages, screenshots, and so on. But for those young Republicans who love Hitler, I think at the very least a chutzpah award for them. It's sort of almost an understatement, really. It's an underreaction, but people know what we mean. It's a shocker, and we wanted to register that as well.
Find another idol. Let's put it that way. So I can go on and begin the Mensch Award of the week. I think we will give one, if I may, or at least a nomination to someone who already won an important prize this week, and that's Joel Mokir. I would call him Yoel, but he's an Israeli-American who is one of the recipients of the Nobel Prize in Economics. He's an economic historian, and he was saying that basically he missed the call from Sweden, and the only reason he saw that someone had called him is because he woke up to see what was happening with the hostages who were being released. So he kind of told Israeli radio about how he was, he woke up, he wanted to see what was going on with hostages, time difference, he's in the United States, and then he realized he had missed a call from, trying to tell him that he won the Peace Prize. I think that's a nice story.
So 2 big prizes for that man, not only the Nobel Prize, but much more cherished, a Mensch Award from us. I was going to, my own nomination...
I hope he answers the phone call from us, by the way, that he doesn't miss it.
Us he won't ignore. He knows his priorities, I'm absolutely sure. I wanted also to make a nomination of really a remarkable story. In Gaza, there is essentially an orphanage. It's a village supporting 600 children who lost their parents. It's called the Academy of Hope, founded by Professor David Hassan, a senior neurosurgeon from North Carolina. It's in the city of Deir al-Balah, right in the center of the Strip. And there they're hoping to look after some 5,000 children 5,000 orphans by the end of the year, 2 hot meals a day, medical treatment, ongoing psychological support. But the twist in this story is that it was made possible by donations and the activism of many Israelis. More than 1,000 Israelis donated to make the Academy of Hope happen in the center of Deir al-Balah, in the heart of Gaza. One said, other Israelis and I are doing this so that we'll be able to say that our hearts weren't indifferent in the face of suffering. So a collective Mensch Award for everyone involved in the Academy of Hope, including those more than 1,000 Israelis who gave funds to enable this orphanage to be created. Obviously, we would much rather it wasn't needed, but given that it is, a Mensch Award for those people who are making the Academy of Hope happen. Those are our awards. We should mention again and give a big push for our live show on October the 29th. It is getting closer and closer. We will be in New York City, and among our guests will be none other than former Secretary of State Hillary Rodham Clinton. So we are thrilled about that.
We are indeed. So check out any ticket info in our show notes, Jonathan, and we will meet. We've been meeting a lot lately.
Yeah,
for
it's becoming a regular thing.
A lot of extra episodes, but we shall meet very soon.
See you then, Yonit.